Hi class, let's review how to multiply and divide with radicals. So if you don't have this in your ICAN, please freeze the video and write down I can multiply and divide with radicals. So here are our steps for working through radicals. First, we're going to rewrite the coefficients together and then our radicals together. And that's essentially using the associative property of multiplication and commutative property of multiplication. Then step 2, we write the prime factors for the radicands. Remember, the radicands are our number underneath the radical symbol. We simplify the radicands, we multiply the coefficients, and then finally we simplify. So here's our example that's on your paper. So first we start off with 4 square roots 15 times 6 square roots 21. So what we do is we make parentheses and we take our coefficients, which are our whole numbers outside of the radicands, and we put them in on their own parentheses. And then we take and put underneath the radical symbol the 15 and the 21 because they were already there. So in step 2 we bring down our coefficients. We haven't done anything with them yet because step 2 says find the prime factors for our radicands, and our prime factors for those are for 15 is 3 and 5, so you can see I have a 3 and a 5, and then the factors for 21 is 3 and 7. Now this is where it's really important to remember when we're looking at a square root symbol, we're trying to find 2 of something, and I can see right here I have a 3 and a 3. So then that gives me 3 times 3 is 9, and the square root of 9 is going to come down below for us. Now, I don't have circled the 5 or the 7. So the 5 and the 7 I'm just going to multiply together, and they're going to stay underneath their own radicand, their own radical symbol. And again, I still haven't done anything with our coefficients yet. So they just keep coming along for the ride. Now, we all know that the square root of 9 is really just 3. Okay? So then we're going to multiply our coefficients together. So we have 4 times 6 times 3, and we end up with 72. And then the rest of it is just the radical symbol with the 35 underneath it. All right, so let's try another one. So here we have the first 2 examples on your paper. And let's think about step number 1. I see on step number 1 that I take and I move my coefficients together. So I have a 3 times, and then there's a 1 hiding right there. So I have 3 times 1 in parentheses. And then underneath my radical symbol, I have 12 times 6. My next step is to factor out my numbers. So I rewrite what my coefficients are, and then I factor things out, and I have 2 times 2 times 3 for 12, and 6 is 2 times 3. Now I look to see if I have any doubles, and I have the square root of 2 times 2. We know that that's a whole number of 2. And then here I have the square root of 3 times 3, and that's a whole number of 3. And I'm still bringing down my coefficients. Now, I do have one lone 2 that is still underneath that radical symbol, so I'm going to leave it underneath that radical symbol. And now I'm going to times all of my coefficients together in my next step. So I have 3 times 1 times 2 times 3, and that gets me 18. And I still have the square root of 2. So stop the video and try the next one by yourself. So as you see, I've worked through the other example, and I came out with 5 square root 2 as my answer. Okay. Just as a reminder, we will not see any of this kind of problem on the test or the quiz. Let's talk about dividing. So pause the video and fill in the words that are missing. And then I will go through and show you how to do this with the example. All right, so the first says write the coefficients together and the radicals together, each as a fraction. It's really important to write these as fractions. so you can see how things are going. This is a 1 over 1 situation. You can write it as a fraction as 1 over 1. You don't have to. But I bet on your prime factorizations, you're like, wait a second, I don't have 375 on my prime factorization chart, Miss Gooch. How am I supposed to do this problem? Well, remember, I know that 5 will go into it because it ends in a 5. 375 ends in 5, so I know 5 will go into it. But then I got thinking, a quarter is 25 cents, and 3/4 equals 75 cents. So I think that 25 will go into this. And in fact, it does. 25 times, so 15 is the number, so 25 times 15 will get me to that 375. So I know I can break a 25 into 5 times 5 and 15 into 3 times 5. So now I pull out any like terms. I try to simplify things down. So I know that 5 times 5 is 25. But I also know that the square root of 5 times 5 is just the whole number of 5. But this is where it gets a little interesting, class. So do you remember, we've talked about this in the past. If I had, I don't know, 2 over 2, those cancel out to be 1. Or let's say I had x squared over x squared, those cancel out to be 1. Well, the same thing is true for radicals. If I had the square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2, I'd still just get 1. So here, I see I have the square root of 3 over the square root of 3, so I know that that's going to turn into a 1, and that's going to turn into a 1. So now all I have left is this underneath the square root symbol, which is a 5. So I have square root 5, and it's all over 1. Okay, now I divide anything else I can, and really my final answer is 5 square root 5. Let's try a few from our paper. The first one's really simple. Sorry about that. The first one's really simple. I don't have any factors, so I go, and I don't have any coefficients, so I go 2 times 2 divided by 6 times 6. I have like terms here. The square root of 2 times 2 equals 2, and the square root of 6 times 6 equals 6. I type that in my calculator to see if I can get it out simplified, and it comes out to be 1/3. Woohoo, I like that. Now let's look at the next one. It gets a little bit harder. So the next one says square root of 4 divided by 4 square root 5. A lot of you guys are going to be tempted to turn that into a 1, but that can't happen because 1 is under a square root symbol and 1 is not. And we know what the square root of 4 actually is. We know the square root of 4 is 2 times 2. And when they come out, it comes out just as 2. So that leaves me 2 over 4 square root 5. Now, this isn't the final answer. I know that 2 and 4 can go smaller, so I can type that in my calculator. 2 divided by 4, or 2 fraction 4, and I come out with 1/2 square root 5. And that is my final answer. All right, guys, do your homework, keep practicing.